important. Let's look at your sheets here, and let's see. We started out with the Witch of Blackbird Pond, which is very early colonial, and now we're moving into the Sign of the Beaver, and we're moving up in time to the early 1700s. And the Sign of the Beaver is important because this is expansion of the colonies. Okay, you noted when you read those first 5 chapters that Matt and his family have moved from Quincy, which they don't say it like that in Massachusetts, they say Quincy, but Quincy was named after the Quincy family, which is John Quincy Adams and all the Adams family. That was their home settlement. And the Matt's family has decided to settle in this new territory up in the area, what we now know as Maine, but it was actually part of Massachusetts territory at the time. And this is the spreading of the colonists. You know, initially they started out in these very defined areas, and they start spreading. And this is what's happening in this period. The period of Sign of the Beaver is the period of Daniel Boone and more westward expansion. And it's that westward expansion that starts causing problems, because we're pushing the Indians further and further west, and they're not appreciating it. We're taking their hunting grounds, their sacred burial grounds, and so all of these issues come into play as we move into the French and Indian War. Okay, now when Matt and his family leave, it says his father has hired a ship to sail them up to Penobscot River. And that's important because Penobscot River was where the Penobscot Indians lived. And his little friend was probably from the Penobscot Indian tribe. Okay, and we find out, we don't know exactly when the historical setting is until Ben shows up. And then we find out exactly what the time period is here. And how do we find that out? We find that out because Ben's antagonistic remarks. This is what Ben says to Matt. He had fought in the recent war against the French, and he despised them for stirring up the Indians against the Maine settlements. Especially he hated the Jesuit priests who had egged the Redskins on, and he had once been part of an expedition that broke into a chapel and smashed the popish idols. Okay, Spear has put so much in that little paragraph. So many issues going on there. A lot of them we've talked about religious persecution once again. Because now France and England are vying for this area, the French are stirring up the Indian tribes there to fight against the British. And these are the elements that are going to come into play for the French and Indian War. And this is really a great lead-in because it actually is George Washington that is responsible for starting the French and Indian War. Most people don't know that, but it was actually kind of interesting to learn that. So I'm going to have, I want to read to you a little passage. This is from George Washington's World. George Washington was recruited by Governor Dinwiddie, the royal governor in Virginia, and he asked him to go up and take back this fort that the French had established on Fort Duquesne, because they were saying, that's our territory, kick the French out, and take back that area. So these are the initial skirmishes that happen to start the French and Indian War. So George Washington goes up there. He's just a young soldier. I mean, he's maybe 23, 24 years old, and he goes there to fulfill this mission, and he gets caught in this. He basically gets caught in this embroiled skirmish between the colonists and the French. And it's that actual battle that's sort of the shot that was heard around the world at that time. This is the first global conflict in the history of the world, because this is warfare that's going to be carried on across the ocean. You've got the nation of France and the nation of England and all of their colonists, and now they're fighting each other. I'm going to read you this. This is from George Washington's World by Genevieve Foster. French and Indian War begins. George Washington had, of course, not the remotest idea that what he was going to do would start a war that crisp October morning in 1753, when he stood in the office of Governor Dinwiddie in Williamsburg, Virginia. nor could he have imagined in his wildest dreams that he would ever sign a document saying that he had committed murder. All he knew was that he had instructions to carry a message to the French to abandon the fort, which they were building on the land of the Ohio Company, of which land both the governor and he himself owned many acres. He was also to locate a site where the Ohio Company could establish a fort. "Okay, how soon can you start?" the governor asked that morning. "Today, sir," answered George, and taking the governor's letter, placed it carefully in his pocket, mounted his horse, and within the hour was far down the road toward Fredericksburg. He hires this Dutchman that says he can speak French. Well, the guy didn't speak French, but Washington knew so little French that this guy was able to pull the wool over his eyes. So after this skirmish, the French made him sign this document that said he actually murdered all these Frenchmen. And the interpreter was supposed to be interpreting this document for him. He incorrectly interpreted it. George Washington signed off on it. And because he signed off on it, they let them go. They let them return home. Well, when that document got back to France, it was like, oh my gosh, they murdered these, they murdered these Frenchmen. So they sent over French troops, and this was how the French and Indian War started. So that was Washington's initiation into global politics. So. It's just always interesting to sort of know the story behind the story. Okay, now, the other thing that comes up in this paragraph is this notion of these popish idols. Okay, Ben hates the popish idols. And what is that? What are we talking about here? I mean, these are qualities that have been established, by and large, by Protestant people. So they're very prejudiced against Catholics, popish people that believe in the Pope. And so he boasts that they attacked this Jesuit chapel and they smashed all their idols. Well, most Catholics would not take to that kindly because those are their images to remind them of divine things. But the Spear is so good here because she shows you exactly what's going on in the minds of these people and how really there was no sense of religious freedom at all in the colonies. And Catholics were very prejudiced against by most of the colonists. And this is the reason that the colony of Maryland was started. The colony of Maryland was the first colony established for Catholics. It was a charter signed by Charles I, and he gave them this property so that Catholics could go there and practice their religion without persecution. So in that little, couple of sentences, Spear has packed so much in. And those are the kinds of things that I'm hoping by doing this that you'll start to notice a little bit more so you can talk about with your kids. Because this is what makes it really rich. And this is what really good historians do. Elizabeth George Spear, won the Newbery Medal for the Bronze Bow. She won a Newbery Honor for this book. Not this book, but Witch of Blackbird Pond. And, I think she did. Yeah, she got a Newbery for Silent Fever also. So this is a historian that really knows what she's doing, and she's made it apprehendable for children. And that's the beauty of a really good historian. The other thing that she's good at is she weaves in lots of different aspects about nature. We had a lot of fun. Does anyone know what a loon sounds like? Has anyone ever heard a northeastern loon? Did that really strike you? Oh. She just described it so beautifully in the text about, Matt going to sleep, that first night in the cabin, he's all by himself, and then the loons start calling. And it's the most overwhelming sound. So it was really fun because we read that passage and then we went online and we keyed in loon, and these sites popped up with these loon calls that were just absolutely chilling. And it was wonderful because, it just made that part of the story come alive.